The refs handed the Minnesota Lynx a technical foul, but here's the part nobody's talking about. Lexie Hull was laying on the court, jaw throbbing, and the officials still blamed her for getting elbowed in the face. What happened next changed everything, and the league doesn't want you to know why. Before we dive into the shocking truth, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to expose something the WNBA has been hiding all season. Trust me, you need to hear this. The Indiana Fever walked into Minnesota's Target Center looking like a MASH unit from a war movie. 5 starters gone. Emergency signings playing on one leg. Sophie Cunningham, season over. Caitlin Clark still watching from the sidelines. And then Kayla McBride's elbow connected with Lexie Hull's face in a moment that would spark an investigation nobody saw coming. But let me back up, because what really happened starts 48 hours earlier when something unprecedented occurred behind closed doors. Stephanie White had just finished counting bodies. The math was brutal. Caitlin Clark out since July 15th with that stubborn groin injury. Sophie Cunningham done for the year with a torn MCL, taking Indiana's enforcer off the board. Sydney Colson, ACL tear, season over. Ari McDonald, foot fracture, career potentially in jeopardy. Chloe Bibby nursing a knee that wouldn't stop swelling. That's not an injury report, that's a casualty list that would make other teams forfeit. The Fever had to sign Odyssey Sims off the street just to have enough bodies to play. Think about that for a second. A 13-year veteran who was sitting at home got a phone call saying, "Pack your bags, you're starting in 24 hours against the best team in the league." Sims showed up limping, literally limping, and still laced them up because Indiana had nobody else. They signed Shea Petty midweek. Aerial Powers got thrown into the fire without a single practice. Kira Lambert got a 7-day hardship deal and played 4 seconds before getting cut. This wasn't basketball anymore. This was survival mode with a playoff spot hanging by a thread. The Fever sat at 19-17, clinging to 8th place with the Los Angeles Sparks breathing down their necks, just 1 game behind. 7 games left in the season. Every possession mattered. Every whistle could be the difference between playoffs and going home. And that's when the real story begins. Kelsey Mitchell had been carrying this skeleton crew on her back for 3 weeks straight. 27 points against Minnesota 2 nights earlier. 35 minutes a night when most stars played 28. Her legs were screaming, but she kept attacking because somebody had to. Lexie Hull was right there with her, logging 37 minutes in that first Minnesota game, scoring 23 points not because she was hot, but because there was literally nobody else to take the shots. You want to know what desperation looks like? Watch Hull's face during warm-ups. She knew she'd play 40 minutes. She knew she'd guard the best players. She knew her body would take punishment, and she did it anyway because that's what this team had become. Warriors fighting with broken weapons. The game started and Minnesota came out hunting. They knew Indiana was wounded. They knew the Fever had 9 players total, with half of them barely knowing the plays. Napheesa Collier was back for the Lynx after missing time with an ankle injury, because of course she was. The basketball gods apparently had money on Minnesota, but here's where it gets interesting. The Fever didn't roll over. Mitchell went into attack mode immediately, slicing through the Lynx defense like she had something to prove. Hull was everywhere, diving for loose balls, contesting shots, making Kayla McBride work for every inch. Boston was battling in the paint against double teams, triple teams, whatever Minnesota threw at her. This wasn't supposed to be competitive. The Lynx were 29-7. The Fever were missing half their team. Vegas had Minnesota by double digits. Indiana didn't care. By halftime, the Fever were right there. Mitchell had already dropped 18. Hull was hitting shots she had no business taking. Even Shea Petty, who nobody outside of hardcore WNBA fans could identify in a lineup, was contributing meaningful minutes. The crowd at Target Center was getting nervous. You could feel it. This was supposed to be easy. Then came the third quarter, and Jessica Shepard decided to show why she's one of the most underrated players in the league. The Lynx forward went 10 for 11 from the field for the game, finishing with 22 points, 11 rebounds, and 11 assists. That's the second triple-double in franchise history. She did it in 21 minutes and 57 seconds, the fastest in WNBA history. But nobody wants to talk about how she got there. Watch the tape closely, count the moving screens, count the pushes in the back, count the times Indiana players got hip-checked with no call. The Lynx were playing prison rules, and the refs were looking the other way. Mitchell took an elbow to the face in the third quarter from Shepard. No call. Howard got bulldozed on a drive. No call. The message was clear. Minnesota could play physical. Indiana couldn't. Which brings us to the moment that broke the internet. Fourth quarter, 8 minutes and 32 seconds left. The Fever down 10, but fighting. Every possession was a war. McBride grabbed a defensive rebound, and Hull did what she's been coached to do her entire career. She pressured the ball. She got close, maybe too close. Her hand grazed McBride's face, barely a touch, the kind of contact that happens 50 times a game. McBride's response was immediate and violent. The elbow came from her shoulder, a full wind up and release that would make a UFC fighter proud. It caught Hull square in the jaw with the sound you could hear on the broadcast. Hull's head snapped back. Her body went limp. She hit the deck hard, legs folding under her in a way that made everyone in the arena gasp. The replay is even worse. You can see McBride look at Hull, see the contact coming, and choose violence. This wasn't a basketball play. This was retaliation with intent. The refs huddled. The crowd held its breath, and then came the call that nobody could believe. Foul on Lexie Hull. Let that sink in. The player laying on the ground holding her face was called for the foul. The player who threw the elbow got to shoot free throws. In what universe does that make sense? The Fever bench exploded. Stephanie White's face turned 3 shades of red. Even Aaliyah Boston, who never shows emotion, stood there with her mouth open in complete shock. But here's the part that's even more disturbing. Nobody came to Hull's defense. Boston was right there, 3 feet away, and she just covered her mouth. Natasha Howard stood frozen. Where was the fire? Where was the protection? If Sophie Cunningham had been on that court, you know exactly what would have happened. She would have been in McBride's face immediately. She would have made it clear that you don't touch her teammates. That's what enforcers do. That's what the Fever desperately missed. The refs went to review, probably because they realized how bad it looked. After watching the replay approximately 17 times, they finally called a technical on McBride. A technical for an elbow to the face that knocked a player to the ground. Andrew Wiggins got suspended for less. Draymond Green has entered the chat, but McBride stayed in the game, scored 13 points, and Minnesota cruised to a 97-84 victory. Hull finished with 8 points in 26 minutes. She could barely open her jaw in the post-game interviews, but what she said next should have been headline news everywhere. Quote, "We put our bodies on the line night in and night out. The best the league can do is to make sure all players are protected, especially when the referees seem to be turning a blind eye on obvious plays." End quote. That's not just frustration. That's an accusation. Hull basically said the refs aren't doing their job, and she's right. This isn't the first time. It won't be the last. The Fever have been getting this treatment all season, and everyone knows why. Let me paint you a picture of what's really happening here. The WNBA has a Caitlin Clark problem. Not because she's bad for the league, but because she's too good. She brings millions of new fans. She sells out arenas. She makes other players nervous about their spotlight. And some people in power don't like that a second-year player has become the face of the league. So what do? You let teams rough up her squad. You swallow whistles. You send a message that the new kids need to learn their place. Don't believe me? Let's look at the evidence. The Fever are top 3 in the league in uncalled flagrant fouls against them. They're dead last in free throw attempts despite attacking the rim constantly. Mitchell drives more than almost any guard in the league, but shoots fewer free throws than spot-up shooters. Clark, when healthy, was getting hammered every game with no calls. Cunningham got injured on a play that should have been a flagrant 2. This isn't conspiracy theory, this is pattern recognition. The timing couldn't be worse. With 7 games left, the Fever's playoff lives hang by a thread. They're 1 game ahead of the Sparks, 3.5 games behind the 6-seeded Storm. Every game is an elimination game, and they're doing it with a roster held together by duct tape and prayer. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Sunday morning, 24 hours after the Hull incident, something happened that nobody saw coming. Caitlin Clark walked onto the court at Target Center for shoot around, not in street clothes, not with a walking boot, in full practice gear, dribbling, shooting, moving with her teammates for the first time in over a month. The videos went viral immediately. Fever fans lost their minds. The league held its breath. Stephanie White played it cool in her presser. Quote, "It was a good step because she got out there on the floor with us for the first time, part of the return to activity protocol." End quote. But everyone knew what this meant. Clark was coming back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next game, but soon. And when she does, everything changes. Think about what this team has done without her. They've gone 10-9 in games Clark has missed this season. They've beaten playoff teams. They've survived the gauntlet. Mitchell has averaged 27 points. Hull has had career nights. Boston has been an all-star. They've done this with emergency signings and players on one leg. Now imagine adding Clark's 8.8 assists per game to this equation. Imagine defenses having to account for her 30-foot range. Imagine Hull getting wide open looks because teams are terrified of leaving Clark. Clark. Imagine Boston getting easy buckets because Clark's gravity pulls defenders away from the paint. This isn't just about making the playoffs anymore. This is about being dangerous when you get there. The remaining schedule sets up perfectly if Clark returns soon. Seattle at home on Monday. The Storm are beatable, especially at Gainbridge. Then a West Coast trip to face the Sparks, Valkyries, and Mercury. All winnable games if Clark is back. Come home for the Sky, travel to Washington, then close against Minnesota. If they can go 5-2, they're not just in the playoffs. They might host a first-round game, but that's a massive if, because Clark has been running and shooting, but she hasn't practiced. She hasn't taken contact. She hasn't played 5-on-5, and this is her third groin injury of the season. The medical staff isn't taking chances. One more setback could end her season, maybe impact her career. They're being careful, as they should be. Meanwhile, the rest of the league is watching nervously. Nobody wants to face a healthy Fever team in a one-game playoff. You think Connecticut wants to see Clark in a win or go-home scenario? You think Phoenix wants to deal with Mitchell and Clark in the backcourt for 40 minutes? Even Minnesota, sitting pretty at 29-7, knows that the Fever beat them in the Commissioner's Cup with Clark healthy. The whole incident just adds fuel to the fire. Every player on that roster saw what happened. They saw their teammate get elbowed and blamed for it. They saw the league's bias in high definition. That's the kind of thing that either breaks a team or forges them into something special. Based on how they've responded to adversity all season, I'm betting on the latter. Kelsey Mitchell said it best after the game. Quote, "We're down, people, so we gotta suck it up, play a little tired, take those timeouts as best we can. Everyone's gotta do a little more." End quote. That's not complaint, that's determination. That's a team that refuses to die. The national media wants to ignore this story. They want to talk about the Aces three-peat chances or the Liberty's revenge tour. They don't want to acknowledge that the most interesting story in the WNBA is happening in Indianapolis. A team destroyed by injuries, fighting through biased officiating, held together by willpower, and waiting for their superstar to return. This is the story of the season, and they're pretending it doesn't exist, but we see it. Fever fans see it. The players see it. And soon, when Clark steps back on that court, everyone will see it. So what happens next? The Storm come to Indianapolis on Monday night. If Clark plays, Gainbridge Fieldhouse will sound like Game 7 of the NBA Finals. If she doesn't, Mitchell and Hull will have to carry them again. Either way, this team isn't going quietly. They've been counted out all season. They've been disrespected by officials. They've had every excuse to quit. Instead, they're still standing, still fighting, still believing. The Lexie Hull elbow incident wasn't just about one bad call. It was about a pattern of disrespect that's followed this team all season. It was about the league showing its true colors. And it was about a team that refuses to break no matter how hard you hit them. Comment below if you think the refs have been biased against the Fever this season. And if you want to see what happens when Caitlin Clark finally returns, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because that comeback video is going to break the internet. This story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. The Fever have 7 games to save their season. Clark is on the verge of returning. The playoffs are within reach, and everyone who doubted them is about to learn a hard lesson. You can knock them down. You can take away their best players. You can stack the deck against them, but you cannot break the Indiana Fever. Not this year. Not this team. Not with everything they've been through. The league better be ready. Because when this team gets healthy, when Clark comes back, when they make the playoffs despite everything, the revenge tour begins. And after what we saw happen to Lexie Hull, after the disrespect all season, they're going to remember every elbow, every bad call, every moment of disrespect. Payback is coming. The only question is whether the rest of the WNBA is ready for it.